This week, we're going to ask the question, what decisions should firms make in a range of contexts? To do this, we need to build up a model of production costs. This will let us think clearly about the costs and benefits firms face. The first context we'll look at will be familiar. We're going to look at competitive firms, firms in markets with many other sellers and many buyers, and looking at goods that are homogeneous. Second, we're going to look at monopoly, where the firm is the only seller in the market, but there are many buyers. Third, we're going to look at monopolistically competitive firms, firms that offer slightly differentiated products in a market with many buyers and many sellers. And finally, we're going to look at environments with very few sellers. This introduces an element of strategic interaction, and to capture strategic interaction, we will turn back to game theory. This video, we're going to introduce the production function, the cost curves, and at the end we're going to drop a big punchline for the rest of the videos. So to really understand firm behavior, we need to start with the production function. A firm's production function takes inputs, labor and capital, and gives us quantity. Labor and capital both add costs, so the higher the output per input, the lower the costs. The more productive we are, the lower our costs end up. Different shaped production functions tell very different stories about the costs of increasing the quantity of output. Our production function gives us costs. As we add labor on the horizontal axis, we increase the quantity of output on the vertical axis. We start with fixed costs, costs that don't vary with the quantity of output. This could be rent, for example. As we add workers on the horizontal axis on the left, we increase our capacity on the vertical axis on the left. And this increases our costs on the right. But as the production function becomes flatter, we increase our quantity of output at a relatively slower rate, which increases our costs more quickly along the total cost curve. So we see this upward slope in the total cost curve. Our total cost is composed of both this fixed cost, the cost that doesn't depend on quantity, and variable cost, the costs that do depend on quantity, like labor and capital. From the total cost curve, we can now find marginal cost. If you know some calculus, you can think of the marginal cost curve as just being a first derivative of the total cost curve. We're essentially just trying to pick up the slope of the total cost curve. The marginal cost curve answers the question, if I add one more unit, how much will my cost go up? So the steeper the total cost curve, the higher the marginal cost curve. And total cost is composed of variable cost and fixed costs. If we divide total cost by quantity, we get average total cost, the cost associated with each unit of output. And this also works for variable cost and fixed costs. And using this identity, we're able to find that the average total cost is equal to the average variable cost plus the average fixed cost. And marginal cost is the cost associated with adding one more unit of quantity. So to calculate marginal cost, we look at the change in total cost divided by the change in quantity. And these three cost curves look something like this. If I rent land for my farm, I can't simply get out of the lease agreement tomorrow. The lease is fixed in the short run, but because at some point I can get out of the lease, in the long run, these fixed costs are variable. So the average variable cost increases to include all these costs by including all of the average fixed costs. So in the long run, the average variable cost is identical to the average total cost. And this leads us to one of our first results. All costs are variable in the long run. In this class, we're going to make the assumption that firms aim to maximize profit. I'm going to drop the punchline for the next videos right here. It turns out a firm maximizes their profits when they set quantity where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue. When we've thought about buyers and sellers in markets, we've thought about their costs and benefits. Sellers want to continue adding units until the benefits of adding an additional unit no longer exceed the costs of adding an additional unit. In the next video, we'll use our newly detailed insight to go back and look at firms' decisions in perfectly competitive markets.